Hi, everybody. This is Marlene Pellicer with Erie News, and today is April 8th, 2022, Friday, April 8th, 2022. So, let's get on to what's going on out there in our weird, weird world. And I'm going to start with this is a piece on my site on Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And you know how some stories, especially in the paranormal world, everybody's very familiar in some form or other with the Amityville Horror. But what we're going to talk about here a little bit in this article is really the background to the actual horror part, which is when the Lutzes moved in there. And this article is titled The House on Ocean Avenue. One of the most researched but still mysterious and bizarre cases is the dark happenings at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville. It started in the early morning hours of November 13, 1974. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., 23, executed his entire family with his rifle. At least, this is why he spent the rest of his life in prison. His parents, two sisters, and two brothers were found dead face down in bed. Strangely, none of the family was awoken by the shots ringing out in the silence that reigns inside a home at 3 a.m. An autopsy confirmed there were no drugs in their systems. None of the neighbors heard anything either, except the barking of the DeFeo's dog. In 2002, Rick Osuna released his book, The Night the DeFeos Died, reinvestigating the Amityville murders. He described the obstacles the defense team encountered in gaining access to evidence and the police department's insistence that only Butch DeFeo committed the crime. Osuna advocated for the case's reopening, not to exonerate DeFeo, who died in March 2021, but to establish who was actually involved in the killing of the family besides him. From the beginning, there have been questions that the massacre was carried out by more than one person. Osuna wrote that DeFeo killed his parents along with the help of a friend, but his 18-year-old sister Dawn was the one who killed their younger siblings. DeFeo then killed her after he saw what she had done, since this was not the original intent of the plan. Dawn had a boyfriend who she wanted to move to Florida with, even though her parents disapproved. This was confirmed by an affidavit he signed in 1974. She had even penned a song, The Night the DeFeos Died, in which she fantasized about the murder of her family. The DeFeo family moved into the Amityville in 1965. But even before then, Ronald DeFeo was a violent abuser of his wife and children. On November 12th, Ronald DeFeo attacked his entire family, leaving the youngest, only 9 years old, with a bloody face. Dawn tried to defend herself with a knife. Prior to this, Butch DeFeo had engaged in fistfights with his own father. Did Dawn convince her brother he had to kill their parents after this last violent encounter? Their mother, even though a victim, always sided with her husband. Some wonder if the family's ties to organized crime had something to do with their deaths. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's me getting a text, but what can I say? Louis DeFeo's father, Michael Briganti Sr., excuse me, was an associate of the Gambino crime family. Ronald DeFeo and Butch worked at the Briganti's dealership. Later, Butch described where he and his girlfriend assisted in disposing of bodies for the mafia. However, killing children goes against the code of the Italian mafia. According to Osuna, Don was left to watch the bedroom where their younger siblings were sleeping, while he, along with his friend Bobby Kowski, killed his parents. Dawn, fearing witnesses, took matters into her hands and killed her brothers and sister. Butch, horrified by his sister's actions, shot her. In Osuna's books, he points out crime scene photos with bloodstains in places which do not coincide with his story that all the DeFeos were killed in their beds. A bullet with a different caliber than the one used by Butch DeFeo was found in the marital bedroom. Osuna believes that Butch, who abused drug and alcohol, confessed as a sole culprit due to a forced confession by the police. The judges involved in the trial rejected evidence this had occurred. despite the prosecutor and police admitting on more than one occasion that the crime required three persons to carry it out. Herman Race, a retired police detective, also came to the same conclusion. At the time of the murder, Butch had a wife named Geraldine, with whom he had a daughter. He later denied they were married. Ironically, Butch became like his father in the way he treated those around him. According to Osuna, Butch DeFeo's attorney, William Weber, desperate because he was denied access to evidence, cooperated in the planning of the infamous haunting experienced by the Lutz family when they moved into the Amityville house. Geraldine DeFeo said Weber hoped it would help Butch's defense. He was not only involved with the Lutzes and Jay Anson, who wrote the 1977 novel, but Father Pecoraro, who was eventually transferred to an entirely different diocese, where he purportedly was forbidden to practice certain Catholic rites. In the lawsuit, Lutz versus Weber, it described a different story about Father Ralph Pecoraro, aka Father Mancuso, than the one found in Jay Anson's novel. In the book, Lutz had supposedly met Father Pecoraro even before he married Kathy. During the trial, George and Kathy describe where they met the priest in mid to late July 1975, and they had married on July 4th, making it impossible he offered any guidance to the couple before their marriage. Father Pecoraro claimed in an affidavit that his only contact with the Lutzes was a telephone call. He denied any of the supernatural occurrences described in the novel. There is doubt that he even visited the house. Father Pecoraro is now deceased. It was at this time that Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated the claims of supernatural activity inside the home. Kathleen Teresa Lutz, who died in 2004 of emphysema, and George Lee Lutz, who died in 2006 of heart disease, divorced in the late 1980s but remained on good terms. James Cromartie, 77, bought the house in 1977. By that point, a bank had foreclosed on the house from the Lutzes. After living in the house 10 years, he said, "Nothing weird ever happened, except for people coming by because of the book and the movie." He sold the house in 1987 to Peter and Jean O'Neill, who in turn sold it in 1997 for $310,000 to Brian Wilson. It went on the market in 2010, listed for $1.15 million. Jay Anson died in 1980, a year after the release of his novel, The Amityville Horror. He died after heart surgery. He was working on another novel, 666, that dealt with the occult. Was there anything supernatural inside the walls of the house on Ocean Avenue? Or perhaps this was something that the DeFeo family, with their dark history, brought with them. Whatever the case, the truth was taken to the grave by all the players. The address of the house was changed from 112 to 108 Ocean Drive. So again, like everything else, the story of the Amityville Horror, everybody thinks of just the supernatural aspect of when the Lutz were chased out, supposedly by something that was going on there. But in truth, really what went on there, not only that culminated in the murder of that family, but what was going on within its walls, because obviously they were living there since 1965, and there was what sounds like severe domestic violence, abuse of the children. That in and of itself, if you think about it, is more of a horror than anything else. But let's move on to the next story. And I found this especially interesting, and if you put it in context, even as to what happened when the Lutzes moved into the house there on Ocean Avenue. And remember, when they moved in there, they got supposedly a bargain, because there had been not just a goal. Keeping that in mind, I want you to, so that if you hear what I mean by this article, why I think it's so interesting, and it's out of Popular Mechanics, and it's titled "The Science of Bad Vibes. Can Some Places Really Hold On to Negative Energy?" Visitors to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland report feelings of tightness in their chest, nervousness in their hands, and feelings of depression. It's almost like the place is haunted by tremendous amounts of bad energy. According to some scientists, there's a high chance it's one of many sites containing negative energy. That means our habitat may not be as neutral as we perceive it to be, explaining the goosebumps and sick to your stomach feeling you may experience in haunted houses or sites where horrific violence took place. There are three predominant theories for this phenomena: the presence of emotional residue, or leftover evidence of past emotions that are still lurking around geopathic stress emanating from Earth itself, and the power of our mind's own expectations. Emotions have the potential to infect or brighten their physical surroundings, even after their source has physically moved to a new location, according to the emotional residue phenomena. Though the story likely originates from early beliefs in the contagious nature of magic, it has nevertheless become the focal point of several legitimate studies in the field of psychology. A possible explanation is that the human nervous system is able to pick up on chemical signals the body gives off through sweat and tears. Studies have found, for instance, that men's libido declines in the presence of women's tears, and that these chemosignals persist in the surrounding environment. Some experiments have attempted to describe human responses to them. A Dutch study published in Psychological Science in 2012, for instance, found that chemosignals previously produced by men who felt fear or disgust generated an interesting reaction among women exposed to them. Scientists collected sweat from men while they attended either a fear-inducing or a disgust-inducing movie and exposed women to it. The fear sweat sample produced fearful facial expressions while performing a visual task, while women who were exposed to chemosignals from the disgust sweat sample produced disgusted facial expressions during the same task. A second study by the same Dutch team, published in Psychological Science in 2015, found that exposure to body odor from people who reported feelings of happiness also produced feelings of happiness in the participants. Researchers recruited 12 men to provide the sweat samples for the study, who again watched a video clip intended to induce a particular emotional state: fear, happiness, and or neutral feelings. 36 women were exposed to the sweat samples. Facial expression data revealed that women who were exposed to fear sweat had greater activity in the medial frontalis muscle, which is responsible for elevating your eyebrows, a common feature and expression of fear. Women who were exposed to happy sweat sported smiles. In its conclusion, the paper mentions a behavioral synchronization between the sweat donor and the sweat smeller. In other words, happiness could spread through chemosignals. Responding to emotional cues is common in the animal kingdom too. There are multiple studies of non-human animals showing that they respond to environmental cues we are not perceiving, at least not consciously. For example, by increasing their levels of stress hormones before storms or reacting to earthquakes or tidal waves. Brian Helmuth, professor of environmental science and public policy at Northeastern University in Boston, tells Popular Mechanics. This may be an issue of sensitivity, or perhaps these animals have sensory abilities we lack, Helmuth says. While I don't know of any Western science that demonstrates the influence of any energy signature, I definitely believe that there is still lots to learn about how humans are influenced by our environments, and especially the emotional, physical, and psychological impacts of environmental damage on humans. But maybe the environment doesn't even need to be damaged to wreak havoc on humans. In 1929, German baron in medical research Gustav Freiherr von Pohl conducted a study in the Bavarian town of Vilsbichberg, concluding that certain geological faults, fractures between two pieces of rock of Earth-radiated energy, were linked with cancer. All the people who had died of cancer in Vilsbichberg since record-keeping began had slept in beds along these geopathic stress lines, leading Van Poel to the unfounded claim that cancer was a disease of location, and to the genesis of the term geopathic stress. According to geopathy advocates, Earth emits energies that can cause ill health in humans. The very definition of geopathic stress. Tunnels, sewers, geological faults, pipes, mineral deposits, utility lines, and underground water are all supposedly points where a certain energy vibration from Earth gets distorted. Geopathic stress proponents say you should avoid spending too much time in, on, or around these distortion points, or you will experience fatigue, headaches, insomnia, and overall very negative feelings. Some of the most hardcore advocates say that even machinery can break down when placed in geopathic stress zones. The good news is that no serious scientific study has explicitly linked fault lines with cancer, bad vibrations since the German aristocrats' days. However, because there are so many environmental factors that affect our bodies, it's impossible to isolate the direct effects Earth has on us, according to Jorge Sanjurjo Sanchez, an associate professor at the University Institute in Geology Isidro Parga Pondal in the University of A Coruña in Spain. And if Earth's radiation or vibration does have direct health effects on us, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sanjurjo Sanchez explains because Earth could nurture us much like a real mother. Low doses of gamma radiation from the ground, a form of radiation more powerful than X-rays, might even be beneficial. He tells Popular Mechanics, citing the elevated lifespans in places like the Greek island of Icaria, where this phenomena occurs. Apparently, places do have their own powers. Since our own associations and expectations could be even more powerful than emotional residue or geopathic stress, if we expect something to feel a certain way, say happy or sad, that can strongly influence our perceptions, such is the power of expectations. If you have positive or negative associations when it comes to certain landscape features, for instance, this could have an impact on how you feel and function beneath your ability to understand it. Studies in which participants predicted the mood of a character based on the emotions of a person who previously lived in their apartment or chose a room based on a sign on a door reinforce an old point in psychology, which is that we quickly and automatically form associations, and those can influence attitudes and behaviors. John Collier, professor of psychology at Northeastern University, tells Popular Mechanics. Research from my lab shows that people who grew up in urban environments tend to associate themselves with features of the built environment, whereas those who grew up in rural environments tend to associate themselves with features of the natural environment. Coley says, moving from the city to the countryside or vice versa could therefore cause stress. If I grew up in the country and then moved to New York, outwardly I might love the hustle and bustle and the constant buzz of energy. But deep down, the sense that this isn't me, even if I'm not aware of it, might take a toll, he says. So, the abandoned house across the street may not actually be haunted, even if it makes your chest tight when you're near it. Perhaps you simply are from a neighborhood where there are few blighted or neglected properties. Over 60 million people have visited Auschwitz by now. The place is hailed as the epitome of dark tourism, a hotly criticized type of travel that involves visiting places historically connected to death, tragedy, and the macabre. There's even an entire Netflix series called Dark Tourist that takes viewers to places like the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant and a lake in Kazakhstan formed from a nuclear blast. Whether you're visiting a place like the National September 11th Memorial Museum in Manhattan or a former concentration camp, immersing ourselves in tragedy can give us significant time to reflect on past history and our own humanity. So next time you get the heebie-jeebies in a place, know that there's at least a possibility that the place is charged with emotion, but don't lose sight of the power of your own mind to concoct those bad vibes. I would at least want, let's say, an experiment like they were talking about with Auschwitz, is because you might experience these feelings because you know where you're at. Whereas if you take somebody someplace with a very dark history, but they're unaware of where they're at, and then gauge what are they feeling, what are they feeling as far as in their bodies or even mentally, that would be a great experiment.